Greetings. My name is Jim Alexander. I'm a proud 2006 inductee into the History Makers. Welcome to our 2020 anniversary.
Hi everyone, my name is Patricia Banks Edmiston. I'm from New York City and I was interviewed by the History Makers in 2018 for my work in opening the doors for African Americans in flight capacities on airlines. I became the first African American flight attendant on a commercial aircraft in 1960. Congratulations, History Makers, for all of the hard work you have done to preserve African American history in the United States. Thank you.
I'm Judge Glenda Hatchett, and it was such an honor, what a privilege to have been interviewed by History Makers back in 2016. And although we'd all looked forward to a glorious celebration in person this year, we are doing it this way. And so I want to thank the History Makers, because if there were ever a time in our history that we needed to be reminded of our richness as a people, it is now. And so I thank you very, very much.
My name is DeMaurice Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the NFL Players Association. Congratulations to History Makers on their 20th anniversary. I was proud to be interviewed by History Makers in November of 2020. Again, congratulations.
Howard Wooley, Potomac, Maryland. I was fortunate to be interviewed by the History Makers in 2008. Thank you.
The History Makers was a bridge that we built as we crossed it. It was all uncharted territory, and often it came with a great deal of struggle. But the risks could, if we overcame them, could result in great rewards. The chance was truly to make a difference.
Oh, okay.
Just slip a sable.
You know what? I will make sure they're contacted.
This evening we are celebrating a true
Been an
legend.
awful good girl, Santa baby. So hurry down the chimney.
Let's take it from 97. Thank you all for allowing us to say.
Eartha, that's going to be your position for the show where Daryl is.
I would prefer her on that side.
Okay, so tell me about yourself. What have you been up to? Can I sit in on that?
Oh, okay. And when I Kitt!
It's only a matter of time. So you want me to come stand here? Okay.
So we'll have everybody, let's get everybody on headsets at 3:30. Let's walk them through.
What I want to see in this next, by 5 is that we're very tight.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce veteran news journalist and our host for the evening, Ms. Gwen Eichel.
No, really, all the applause, really. Hello. Yeah, right. I am so pleased and so honored to introduce to you Miss Eartha Kitt.
Hurry. Tonight.
one of the most important things that any of us can do, either as individuals or as a community, is to make sure that we document and preserve our history for our children's, grandchildren's, and all of the generations to ensue.
When I run across someone who is unfamiliar with the organization, I get excited about telling them all about the different things that we have. I can mention the archive, I can mention the evening with programs, I can mention the things that we do in schools, I can mention how we fundraise, I can mention the different handouts, the brochures, sponsorship opportunities.
We have a curriculum that was functional in 3 different school systems, and I think that's huge because history is only powerful if it's in the hands of the people. And so by providing this information to a larger masses, we're actually empowering them at the same time.
We are documenting an important part of American history, and people don't understand that if we don't have an accurate reflection and testimonials and narratives of different experiences that happened in all facets of society, particularly an often neglected part like the African American community, then we don't have an accurate understanding of the present.
I am happy and honored to be here to celebrate the life and career of one of the most significant corporate leaders of our time. He rose from corporate lawyer to bank president, and then he was picked to head the world's largest media and entertainment company. His name is Richard Parsons.
I like the music.
En chantant des chansons, c'est si bon de se dire des mots doux, de petits riens de tout, mais qui en disent a langue en voyage.
So, you feel good about everything?
Fabulous. You have no idea.
Les passants
The star who you were about to meet.
Our history is so important, and there's a whole generation out there that's just not aware of people like Eartha Kitt, you know. I mean, our generation today, they focus on, you know, these pop icons like Lil Wayne and Sierra and all these other folks, not to take anything from them, but, you know, what about the people who laid the groundwork for these artists today, you know, and that's why things like this is so important.
They say that I'm a witch and that I weave a spell. Well, I use my eyes to invite you, my lips to delight you, and all of the charms of the feminine wiles to excite you. They say that I'm a witch and that I weave a spell. Well, I'll be a son of a what the well, let me tell you, brother, I'd rather be burned as a witch than never to burn at all. I use my songs to entice you, with verses to vice you, and all of my bag of tricks to shoes and rice you. They say that I'm a witch and that I weave a spell. Well, I'll be a son of a oh, and what the well, let me tell you, I'd rather be burned as a witch than never to burn at all. I think you want a gal, a little pal, never look at another, will be good and true and take care of you. Baby, you want a mother, I use my charms to undo you, my arms to unglue you, and all of the hits of the week of sex to boo-doo-doo-doo-doo you. They say that I'm a witch, that I weave a spell. Well, I'll be a son of a oh, well, let me tell you, I'd rather be burned as a witch than never to burn at all. Bring your life little joys, sweet and sharp, gentle eye. I'll take the men, not the boys. I use my eyes to invite you, my lips to delight you, and where you gonna hide if I decide to use my teeth and bite you? Oh, they say that I'm a witch and that I weave a spell. Well, I'll be a son of a woo. Well, let me tell you, I'd rather be burned as a witch than never to burn at all. you never can tell. I just might use my teeth to punch you. They say that I'm a witch, that I weave a spell. Well, I'll be a son of a, ooh, what the hell, baby? I'd rather be burned as a witch than never to burn at all. Got a match?
The following program was funded in part by Toyota, AT&T, Baldwin Richardson Foods, Lincoln Financial Group, Apple, American Airlines. A complete list is available at thehistorymakers.org. From her start as a Katherine Dunham dancer to her role in numerous Broadway productions, she went on to worldwide acclaim. She has distinguished herself in film, theater, cabaret, music, and on television. She has made an indelible mark on pop culture in the role of Catwoman in the TV hit series Batman. The History Makers, the nation's largest African-American video oral history archive, is proud to present An Evening with Eartha Kitt. And now to our host, veteran PBS-TV journalist, Miss Gwen Ifill.
I am so excited and so thrilled to be here tonight because of the star who you are about to meet. It is very exciting. She is a star of Broadway. She's a star of dance. She's a star of movies and of television. I mean, she was born to be Catwoman, right? She has a mean growl, and she is Eartha Kitt. Let's take a look.
Have you heard of a place called Peyton, where they have so much fun tater-tating? But to tater-tate, you have to have a mate. Don't hesitate, or you might get the gate. Say you want me with my desire. If you find the flame, I might set the fire. It's up to you. You see, I'm really shy. So sell me, sell me, sell me, and maybe this baby maybe.
Ladies and gentlemen, my honor to present to you Miss Eartha Kitt.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, settle down. Especially you, Missy. I couldn't do that, so don't get excited here. Thank you. But I have to tell you, after watching what you just pulled walking out here, how do you do this?
Well, I think it's because I want to.
But there are a lot of things I want to do. And I can't quite do it the way you can.
Well, you have to prepare yourself to do the things that you really want to do, as you know. And if you want to do that kind of thing, such as keeping yourself in shape, you know.
No.
And even though I want to tell you all that I'm 81 years old. Thank you. And I'm very happy to have shared every one of those years on the path that I have been on.
Okay, this is what 81 is supposed to look like, people. What keeps you going?
The desire to keep going. And I think that desire gives me the strength to want to go on, and therefore I try to keep myself as prepared as much as possible to be able to do that. By taking exercises, eating the right kind of food, and thinking the right kind of thoughts, and keeping negative people out of my life.
You did not come to this born to the manor. You grew up in the South, you lived...
No, I never grew up in the South.
You didn't?
No, I was born there and they brought me, well, it's very complicated because it has made me feel inside that the complication was that I thought one person was my mother who gave me away. And she kept giving me away because she wanted to marry a man who had already 4 or 5 children. He's a black man. And he had said to her, and I heard these words through the cracks of a wall as my so-called mother was on her knees on the floor begging him to take me. And he said, no, I don't want that yellow gal in my house. She will disturb the rest of my children.
Just to be clear, yellow gal meant biracial. That was what they meant at the time.
Yes.
So
that's when she gave me away and started giving me away. Well, she was giving me away before to anybody who would accept me. This is the last time that she gave me away, and it was because he didn't want me.
Your aunt came to your rescue in New York.
Yes.
And sent for you.
That's the confusion. While I was living with her in New York, she eventually told me that she was my mother, and therefore, I don't know which one was which.
This is Aunt Mamie.
Aunt Mamie, yes. And it's not that she was mean, but she didn't know anything about taking care of children.
She was stern.
Yeah, but because I felt I was in her way. She was a very beautiful woman, and she was about just under 6 feet tall. And when she walked down the street, everybody turned around and looked at her. That's how gorgeous she was. So she was also a very desired woman. So I felt I was in the way. And I realized I had to get out of there somehow or the other because I never wanted to be in anybody's way.
So to get out of her way, you just got out of the house?
Yes, I found work wherever I could after schools and started to take care of myself as best I could.
Was this when you first got interested in theater?
And that's very funny because I don't think I ever really got interested in theater. I was always interested in trying to communicate, to have a feeling from someone to make me feel that I was worthwhile. So when my teacher, Mrs. Bishop, I will never forget her. She's a beautiful brown-skinned lady at PS 136 in Harlem. But she bought me a ticket to go to see Jose Ferrer in Cyrano de Bergerac.
Ah, nice way to start.
And Gwen, when I saw this play and saw and felt the affection that the people were giving him and the people of the cast, I had a feeling inside of myself that maybe that's how I can get people to want me.
At some point, you kind of began to focus on dance. And we want to take a look at some of your early transition with Katherine Dunham. Let's watch.
New York held much promise for the young Eartha May. At age 18, Eartha was invited to join the Katherine Dunham dance troupe. This led to a European tour with the production of Bal Negre, a tour of Mexico, and a tour of London and Paris, where a whole new world opened up. Kitt would leave Dunham to perform in the Parisian nightclub Carols. Orson Welles would meet her only to cast her opposite him in the role as Helen of Troy in Orson Welles' Faust. Then she performed in Le Perroquet nightclub. And opening night, she ad-libbed a song that would become one of her hallmark songs, C'est bon.
C'est si bon de se dire des mots doux, de petits rien de tout, mais qui en disent en langue.
In 1951, after performing 2 weeks in Greece Uskadara, Kitt returned to New York only to have a disappointing opening night at the nightclub La Vie en Rose. That opening would lead to a stint at the Village Gate, where Leonard Sillman spotted Eartha and cast her in the Broadway review New Faces of 1952.
Bal petit bal.
which ran on Broadway for almost a year.
C'était pour moi, ce soir-là, rien qu'un inconnu.
It was new faces and Leonard Sillman that would jumpstart her career with such legendary songs as Bal Petit Bal and Monotonous.
There are such demands for me, a man of distinction to switch brands for me. Macy's and Gimbels shook hands for me. Monotonous, monotonous.
You know, I watch you watching yourself, and I wonder, do you recognize yourself in those old pictures?
I don't know who she is.
Whoever she was, she had great arms. Let's talk about the Katherine Dunham experience. That was very different than what you thought it was going to be, and it was coincidental how you happened to get into the Katherine Dunham dance troupe.
Yes, my girlfriend at 115th Street and Madison Avenue, Joyce, she dared me to go down to have an audition for Katherine Dunham because I had seen Lena Horne and Katherine Dunham, and I think they were both in Stormy Weather.
Right.
And they were the same color I am on the screen anyway.
Yeah.
So I felt an affinity for them. You know, maybe something like that could be me too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why she dared me to go down to have the audition. And I did. I joined the class and I did all of my movements like the teacher was doing, and the drums were going kung 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 param param pam pam pam. So I did it.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what I would do. Yeah.
And I won a full scholarship.
It worked.
And that's how I really got into show business.
How did you get along with her?
With Miss Dunham? Well, I don't want to say anything negative about her, but I will. I'm very, 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 very happy that she made a company like hers, because it was, that we know of, the first time an Afro-American ballet company. Not that we were all ballet dancing, although we were taking classes from Martha Graham and also a very strong Russian ballet teacher. We had to learn from the start ballet routines. But it went on that photographers and people were coming in to take pictures, because we were always on Sundays having backers audition, and there were lines and lines of people in a row, and I was always chosen to do these wonderful dance movements in front of all these people. So the photographers got very interested in my legs.
I can't imagine why.
So because they were picking me out all the time to take these pictures, Miss Dunham, she was not very nice with me. But she might have been like that with other people, but I didn't notice. And one day she said to me, "Kitty, you will never be anything because you've got too much excess baggage."
Baggage?
Which she meant that I had long hair.
Which is a bad thing.
Yeah, for her it was a bad thing because it was too attractive for her. So she made me feel very small.
So you had to part ways, but along the way, think of the people who you ran with during this time. Carmen Lavalade, Ethel Waters. You were contemporaries.
Oh, I have to tell you about Ethel Waters.
Please.
She had a boyfriend, and his name was Archie Savage. And he was a tap dancer.
Yeah.
And she always wanted him to be in whatever she was doing. So, if you saw Cabin in the Sky, you could see him doing this tap dancing.
He was. Oh.
Now, here we were, as hula dancers or whatever it were we were doing on the stage, and we had all this sand on the stage, and all of a sudden Ethel Waters wanted Arthur Savage to come out and do his tap dancing on the stage on the sand. So he was going slipping all over the place on his but he got there. Now, before he got it, in order to get him to do that, she went to the producer.
And she used every 4-letter word in the book.
Really?
Now, you would never think that Eartha Waters would be like that. Well, darling, she was. As wonderful as entertainer she was, she didn't know how to use a sailor's tongue. And she would then cuss everybody out and get those dancers off my stage. And she would take her little Bible and go into the wings. And she would read the Bible in her way that was washing out her mouth.
You stayed friends for life.
You know, I don't know how short a time it was before she died, but she knew that I always grow my own food, and one of the foods is collard greens. And her manager told her that, so she wanted to come to my house in Beverly Hills and for me to cook her these collard greens, which were growing in my garden, which you would come out and see the collard greens, and I would take them into the house and wash them, and I would cook them for her and put it on the table with all the finery that you all have allowed me to live like this now, with my good silver and my good whatever. And I would put the collard greens on the table and serve her like you would serve. She wanted to eat out of the pot.
Well, she was
Which was
real.
a wonderful thing for me.
Yeah.
Because it was so spiritual. And until this day, I know I'm by myself, I'm eating out of the pot.
Me too.
Because it's so spiritual, I love that.
No, so there was that part of your life, eating out of the pot. And then there's Europe and Paris. And you got to meet Josephine Baker, didn't you?
That was the first thing we did when we got to Paris with the Catherine Dunham Company. We went right to see Josephine Baker, and she was absolutely wonderful. And through the years, we remained friends, and I was helping her along with people like Grace Kelly and Marlene Dietrich. We were all helping her with the children.
How much of an impact did Europe make on your life? Off and on over the years, you spent a lot of time there.
Well, I think Europe probably made me realize that I should learn how to read more, get more acquainted with people who have something to say, have conversations, which is what we did in Paris. We used to go to the Café de Flore, Le Deux Magots, these outdoor restaurants that didn't cost very much money. And we would, maybe 10 of us, like James Baldwin, John Paul Sartre, and people like that, Greco, so forth and so on, we would have a table and we'd all sit around and eat out of one bowl, and it was choucroute garnier, sauerkraut and fatback. which to me,
yum.
When you, that's true, and it's very true. When you don't have any money, honey, go for the fatback.
Even in Paris.
Right, even in Paris, because fatback makes you feel full, and it's very nourishing. I wouldn't eat it so much today, but I do go into it once in a while, yes.
Did Europe also just broaden your thinking about the world?
Oh, yes. This was in 1950-something, I think, end of 1950-something. And at that time, you could have one ticket to go around the world. And you can stop in all of the main cities around the world and get back on the same place up to 2 weeks or so and so. So I did that because I had about 2 months before I had to come back to America to do a play. And so I did. And traveling around the world like that all by myself, when you have to learn, you have to be curious, and you have to find your way in and out of circumstances so that you don't get into trouble. And of course, I did get into trouble because...
Well, I bet you did.
Well, when I was doing this film with Sidney Poitier and we were in Nigeria, he was the one that dared me to go up that hill to visit a group of people who followed the bats, the Odo tribe. Well, in my curiosity, naturally, if you tell me not to do something, I'm going to go.
Of course.
So I went in the middle of the afternoon. I got a photographer who was always around. And I had also been in the papers because every day, since I didn't have anything to do in Africa, I would do my exercises every day. And every day I'd get up in the morning because I love the sunrise. So I was in my very, 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 very tiny bikini, riding a bicycle.
Okay.
So eventually, I don't know why, but I would see people hanging from the trees, watching me go up and down the roads and the
Why would
pathways.
they do
And I
such a
would
go
thing?
through the marketplaces, saying hello to the people and so forth and so on, in my bikini. Well, some few days, or I don't know how many days later, the headlines in the newspaper says, Eartha Kitt is disturbing the natives.
And I think you were.
So when Sidney Poitier dared me to go up that side of the mountain, I did. And saw the Odo tribe and see the bats, because they would hang to the trees. That's what I wanted to see.
Yeah.
But these bats that were all so beautifully hanging to these trees, and they looked like fists on top of one another, like that.
Yeah.
So, now how do I prove to Sidney Poitier that this is what I did? So I went to the chief of the tribe with the bodyguards with their, what do they call those guns on the backs,
Yeah.
the handmade guns.
Oh.
And they...
Were you wearing a bikini?
I wasn't wearing a
Okay, just
bikini
checking.
this time. So he said, I told him what I would like to do, and when I went to his cabin, he was playing Eartha Kitt records, so he knew who I was. So we went to the shrine, what they call the shrine. It's 3 trees that are dug out in the center, and that's where the bats would hang out, and hang on all of these branches. So, but I wanted to see them fly away. So you have to shoot off this ground gun, is what they call it.
Yeah.
A ground gun, and inside of this ground gun are these bullets that when you shoot them, they spread out, and it kills, these remnants from the bullets would kill anything that it would hit. So naturally, I got a bat. So now,
What did you do?
I went back to the catering rest house where we were staying, and I had the houseboy who was taking care of me in my cabin. Not in that way.
I'm just listening.
I had him
Houseboy,
get me
yes.
some, because it was Christmas time.
Yes.
So I had him get me some Christmas paper. And I had this bat who was hanging out like this with his arms and his paws up like that. His arms are out like that. And so I wrapped this bat 1 page at a time with a little bow, 10 times, 1 page at a time, big bow, and I took it back to the catering rest house at dinner time. And I called Sidney Poitier and the crew into the bar where we always had our meetings. And I said, oh, I didn't know what to get you for Christmas. So I went out and I found something all by myself. And he was going, oh. So then I have him open up the package.
What did he do?
And he was opening up. He was getting more furious by the second. And when he saw the and he leapt out of the window. He didn't talk to me for some time.
Really?
Right.
But you've made up since?
Oh, yes, we've made up
Okay,
since.
just checking. So now here's another thing that happened to you when you were abroad. Aunt Mamie, who we talked about earlier, she died. You came home for
Yes.
the funeral. And there was this collision of worlds. There was the new Eartha
Yes.
and the old Eartha May.
When she died, I came to New York, took her body down south where she wanted to be buried. And I was all dressed up in my Parisian gown, not gowns, but like looking like Vogue with my hair all coiffured, well done, and all dressed up.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in first class.
Yeah.
Now this was about 1950. And this gentleman comes through and he says, you can't sit here. So what are you going to do? You ignore him.
So you just kept sitting there?
I just kept sitting there, and he still ignored me. And every time he came through, I pretended I didn't hear a thing. And when I got to the other side, getting out of first class, now if I'd had a photographer with me, you see, I could have made a big story. But I don't think about those things. What is wrong, and you correct the wrong at the moment that it happens, if you possibly can, without any furor, without your fist in the air,
Yeah.
without hatred, because that's conditioning. And you have
Except
to
that
understand that.
it must have been shocking after having spent time in an environment where this did not happen, to come back to the United States and to be reminded how far we had not come.
Yes, but now I think about how far we have come. And that, to me, is very, very, very important. And I'm very glad to have been a part of it.
I want to go back to your experience with Orson Welles and the production of Faust. We saw some pictures of that. It seems like pretty non-traditional casting to cast you as Helen of Troy at that time, opposite him.
Yes, but Orson was one of those kind of people. And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought he wanted me as Helen of Troy. And when he said, "Helen, make me immortal with a kiss," he took me in his arms, and the audience is there. And as I'm leaning in his arms, and he says, "Helen, make me immortal with a kiss," he kisses me and crunch right into my bottom lip. Oh, you'd be surprised at the things I read about myself. It's hysterical.
Like what?
Funny. Well, like having an affair with Orson Welles, for instance.
You see, I was going to ask about that, but now I'm thinking maybe not.
And one of the papers said that when I opened in the nightclub there, that's where he saw me. It said, the most exciting thing that's happened to Paris in 25 years, which was little Eartha Kitt.
And you pretty much agree. You did not exactly disagree, I'm thinking. Somewhere along the way, you were spotted in much the same way that you were spotted by him in this nightclub for New Faces of 1952.
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, I think in Paris was where Leonard Sillman saw me. And when he started doing his production of New Faces of 52, I had returned to America for La Vie en Rose, which I was not very successful because they said I was singing in too many different languages, and what is it, and you know, what does he think she's doing? And they were not accustomed to us being so different. You know, I guess they expected me to be singing the blues and jazz, the gospel. So I played 1 week there, and they just canceled my contract. And after a while, I was not working. Nobody was asking me to work, and I wanted to go back to Paris because I knew I could work there. I went to William Morris, who had brought me back to America, to ask them to lend me $25 until they find some work for me. Who do you say you are? How do you spell your name?
Really?
That really hurts.
That must have hurt.
That really hurts. So I left the office and I'm walking up Broadway, so ashamed. And I felt someone following me. And in my shameness, I didn't want to show my face. And I had 5 cents left to take a train up to 128th Street, where I was living at the time. And he said things like, "I don't want you to feel about opening night in La Vie en Rose." He said, "I was there, and you're a wonderful artist. Don't lose faith." Or some words to that extent. And as he walked away, he turned back and said, "Oh, by the way, my name is Jose Ferrer." And that was the first artist I had ever seen on a legitimate stage.
Wow.
And that gave me courage. And then right after that, Max Gordon asked me to come down to the Village Vanguard and start all over again.
It was at Vanguard where Leonard Sillman saw you,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Let's take a look. New Faces of 1952.
Kitt's success with New Faces of 1952 led to a 5-year recording contract with RCA, and she became the hottest female recording artist of the 1950s.
Santa baby, just slip a sable under the tree for me. Been an awful good girl, Santa baby, and hurry down the chimney tonight. Santa honey, a '54 convertible to light blue. I'll wait up for you, dear Santa baby, and hurry down the chimney tonight.
Continuing to perform on stage, Kitt began to make movies,
Danny, meet Noah. Blanche, meet Danny. Danny, meet Anna.
including St. Louis Blues with Nat King Cole and Mark of the Hawk with Sidney Poitier. Kitt finds herself in a love relationship with Arthur Lowe of Lowe's Theater and becomes close friends with actor James Dean. And by 1960, she is presented with her own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. That same year, she marries Bill McDonald. That marriage would last 5 years, but that union would produce her beloved daughter, Kitt. Movie and TV roles would follow.
Sorry to have caused you so much trouble. Don't get killed on the way out.
But nothing like her role of Catwoman in the TV series Batman.
Next move is to purloin and, if possible, permanently purge Batman and Robin.
It would be this role of Catwoman that would redefine Eartha Kitt and introduce her to a whole new audience.
Now, I have to make it an admission that Catwoman for me is the moment, of course, and Santa Baby, not necessarily in that order. Your career took off at this point. You exploded. Did you prefer? I mean, you were nominated for a Tony Award for Mrs. Patterson, right?
Yes,
1954. Did you prefer stage, screen, television? Which?
I prefer live performing. I've always said that the audience has always been my best director, and you still are. So thank you.
Miss Kitt, we have to talk about your love life.
Gwen, you've been knowing me for 1,000 years and you still call me Miss Kitt. It's time you call me Eartha.
Okay. Eartha, we still have to talk about your love life. Tell us, who was the love of your life?
The first one that really I wanted to have as a father to my child was Arthur Lowe Jr. And his mother said she would, well, she threatened to shoot him in his foot or something if he married a brown-skinned woman. I learned that far afterwards. So that was not possible. And I was going with Charlie Revson. At the time, he was having his $64,000 question. And he's another one that I would have loved to have as Kitt's father. But he got into trouble with his $64,000 question, and you know, that relationship, he was afraid that his stockholders would pull out if they knew about me, so that was the end of that relationship. But those were two people that I really would have loved to have Kitt as their father.
And at some point, you finally did meet Kitt's father.
Yes, well, he was there.
Okay.
And in many ways, I'm very glad I married him, because even though it didn't turn out the way I would love for it to have turned out, I got the best of the deal, because look what came about, my wonderful, beautiful child.
Who is here tonight?
Who's here tonight, and she's now...
Kitt Shapiro. Motherhood made a big difference, didn't it?
Oh, yes. Because I felt now I had something more to strive for. And whatever difficulties I got in at the time, my child came first.
You know, you lived, it's clear to hear you tell the tale that you lived in kind of parallel worlds in some ways. Black world, white world. Did the two ever mix?
And I think so. Because I don't go through life, and never have, as a person who belongs to a race, as we call a race of color, race of yellow or brown or whatever the color you are. I'm a person of the race of human beings.
But at the time that you said that in an interview once, you got into some trouble in the black community. They said, what is she talking about?
Oh, yes. because she says, how come she doesn't recognize herself as a black person? And I feel as long as I carry myself as a black person, I'm separating myself from the rest of the world. And therefore, that means that I want you to treat me differently. And I don't want to be treated differently than you would treat someone who deserves whatever kindness they are endowed or should have.
You were, as much as you say you're not a race woman in the way that people define that, you were an ardent supporter of Martin Luther King.
Oh, yes. Because he spoke the right kind of messages. He brought us together without hatred. And his speeches were absolutely inspiring. And even though he said, I have a dream, I've always said, okay, dreaming is wonderful, but it's up to me to do something about that dream. I cannot sit and wait for the government to come and give me a handout, which was my case when I was a kid in New York. You can see me sometimes in a photograph with my relief dress on, but in that relief dress and my one pair of shoes for how long they lasted, when I went to school, the kids realized that I was poor. But when they put us all in uniforms, that situation was eradicated. And therefore, I think everybody in school should wear the same uniform, and all this prejudice situation, to some extent, and hatred would be eradicated. Because politicians particularly seems to make us feel that you're different from me and I'm different from you. When we're all one in the same blood, why should we be treated differently? What we need is a foundational good education. Why is it that they're constantly saying better education, better schools, and ever since I was a kid, they're saying the same thing. We haven't gotten better schools, and we haven't gotten a better education.
You know, as you know, I spend most of my life talking to people about these issues, and no one is ever as honest as you seem to be about this. No wonder you got in trouble at the White House.
And I'll continue to be in trouble if you're asking me a question.
Well, good. But tell me about what happened at the White House, though. That there are different versions of what happened with you. You upset the president's wife.
Because she asked me a question. And the question was, why is there so much juvenile delinquency in the streets of America? Because of Vietnam. That's what the boys were telling me. They came to my dressing rooms, whether it was in a hotel room or in my dressing room in the theater, wherever it was, wherever I was. And we would sit on the floor with a glass of champagne, of course. And they would tell me what their feelings were, because I would ask them questions. And so they said, it's not that we're running away from America because we don't like America. We happen to love our country, but we don't want to be involved in Vietnam because we think it's a dishonorable war. So when I was given the floor, and first of all, I said, I think we've missed out on something here today. I thought the question was about what the question was about on my invitation. The invitation said, why is there so much juvenile delinquency in the streets of America, from Mrs. Johnson, who was having a luncheon for those of us who they felt have done something for the community. And they were talking about how we should put trees in the, what do you call that?
Median strip.
Yeah, on 7th Avenue.
Yeah.
I said the first thing that people would do is burn those trees down to make fire, because what they want are jobs. If you want to beautify America, then beautify people by giving them jobs before you beautify America with seeds.
They didn't react particularly well to that suggestion at the White House, did they? In the end, President Johnson had a role in this. He wasn't happy with what you said. He blacklisted you. He made it difficult
No, I wasn't
for you
blacklisted.
to get word. What happened?
I was whitelisted.
You were. Okay. I like that. I like that. We're going to go with that. So you were whitelisted, being banished, as it were, from your ability to live your livelihood, sets you up eventually, after a while, for one of your many great comebacks. Let's take a look.
Invited to the White House for Lady Bird's 50-woman luncheon, Kitt spoke out against the Vietnam War and its injustices. Her doing so caused Eartha to be blacklisted, forcing her to leave the United States for 6 years. After her 6-year exile, Kitt would return to receive a Tony Award nomination for her role in the Broadway production of Timbuktu. She would go on to pen 2 more autobiographies on her life. Then in the 1990s, Kitt would appear in the movie Boomerang.
Marcus, darling.
She was also nominated for a Tony Award as the co-star of the Broadway musical The Wild Party. This lady of the stage and screen has continued to hone her craft and to entertain audiences while she did so. There is only one Eartha Kitt.
Only one Eartha Kitt. Now, it should be said, you have now, I think, appealed to about 8 generations of people who know you for different things. Boomerang is a completely different thing. You even did disco at one point, I believe.
Yes.
You got hit
And my
with
first
disco.
gold record, but my only gold record, was with a song called I Don't Wanna Be Alone, Where Is My Baby?
That was your only goal?
My only gold.
That's shocking.
I know.
But I guess the point is you managed to reinvent yourself periodically whenever the need arose.
Because when I needed work, I went.
You went where the work
they
was.
do say necessity is the mother of invention. And I really believe in that. And it's not that I went off my own path, but I would try something once in a while and find that either it worked or it didn't work. And I've always found my way back on my own path because that's where I'm most comfortable.
Your speaking voice is so recognizable that you did a lot of voice work.
Yes, and it's amazing that at the age of 80-something, I got nominated for having the best voice in animated daytime television.
This is what Jeffrey Holder said about you. He was interviewed for History Makers, and he said, "There's nobody like Eartha Kitt. She's a brilliant performer. She's someone who comes from an old, wonderful school of theater and from a world where they know their craft inside out. They're pros. They did it the hard way, and their pure talent and their pure genius will cut you like a knife because they are all originals."
Oh.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
But very nice. But isn't it also true?
It's like what Charlie Revson told me. He said, "Do you know?" Because he would come to my house and ask me to. He would say to me, "You know, Eartha, I'm doing this television show. That the one it was a penthouse that he would get stars to be the star of the night." And he said, "You know, I cannot find enough artists to be able to hold an audience in the palm of their hand for an hour." And he said, "The ones that I find," he said, 6 out of 10 are black." Mm-hmm. And I said, "What's wrong with that?" He said, "Well, I can't do that." And I said, "Charlie, you are the dictator of maquillage, makeup in this country. You are a big businessman. You're very smart. You are a leader. Why can't you do that?" I said, "I know you can't use me because everybody knows about us, but you can use a very handsome guy like Harry Belafonte or Lena Horne," which he did. Mm-hmm. He opened his seasons with Harry Belafonte.
But I sometimes wonder if people weren't actually more willing to accept people like you and Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier and Lena Horne than we gave them credit for. I was watching some old clips of Ed Sullivan with you on the Ed Sullivan Show back in the 60s. Boy, he was into you. I'm telling you. I could see it in his eyes.
Well, I was on his show a bit more often than the other artists.
Yeah. Okay, so I won't press you on that one, even though I have my own suspicions.
No, well, but you know, with Ed Sullivan, it was also very interesting times too. And I adored Ed Sullivan, even though he had no idea how to speak the English language. But he told me that he was, when I was on his shows and I wore a gown, he would get letters from people who said she's too sexy.
Huh.
So he started to put me in, you know, the toreador pants that I introduced to the United States. but he didn't have a very large Jewish audience. And I happen to have a very large Hebrew repertoire. So one day I came on his show, and RC Victor wanted me to plug one of my new songs that they were going to release at any minute now. The man sent me home because he wanted me to sing a Hebrew song because he wanted me to gather a Jewish audience for him. So I did, and I came back and said, Beravot Negev, Mitnotzet Satal. And Sullivan was able to get a Jewish audience.
Through you. What an interesting way to get a Jewish audience. You are unique. There is nobody I can point to on the scene who has replicated what you have replicated. What message can you leave for those young performers who want to be you or aspire to be you?
If you're looking for immediate rewards, you're only looking for the money.
Yeah.
And money can be very valuable. There's not much sense to it. And I think that if you want to really be true to yourself, then do that which you know you can do best and stick with it. Don't follow the herd.
Well, I don't think you've ever done that, follow the herd, and for that we are immensely grateful, Eartha Kitt. Thank you. Okay, here's the part, I don't know about you, but that I've been waiting for, a real treat. 3 of Eartha Kitt's biggest hits, which she will perform for you live tonight.
Now?
Now, with the help of Daryl Waters on piano and the Evergreen Trio. All yours.
All by myself, no one to talk with, but I'm beyond the self. Ain't misbehaving, I'm saving my love for you. I know for certain, the one I love, I'm through with flirting, it's just you I'm thinking of. Ain't misbehaving, I'm saving my love for you. Like Jack Horner in the corner, don't go nowhere. What do I care? Your kisses are worth waiting for. Believe me, I don't stay out late, don't care to go. I'm home about 8, just me and my radio. Ain't misbehaving, I'm saving my love for you. I'm home about 8, just me and my radio. Ain't misbehaving, I'm saving my love for you. Ain't misbehaving, I'm saving my love for you. have so much fun with myself. Now, this is one of the songs that Gwen was talking about my experiences in Paris when I was just starting out. And when Miss Dunham dared me to leave the company, I took the dare and started on my own. And there I was, standing on the side of the stage at the ABC Theater, watching them put a very tiny young lady together. She was so small, I thought she would never be able to stand on her own 2 feet. But when the curtain went up and she took a hold of the microphone, she became Edith Piaf. Quand il me prend dans ses bras, il me parle tout bas. Je vois la vie en rose. Il me dit les mots d'amour, les mots de tous les jours. Et j'en veux quelque chose. Il est entré dans mon cœur. Il parle de bonheur dont je connais la cause. C'est lui pour moi, moi pour lui dans la vie. Il me l'a dit, la joie pour la vie. Et dès que je l'aperçois, alors je sens en moi mon cœur qui bat. No complaint and no regrets. I still believe in chasing dreams and placing bets. But I have learned that all you give is all you get. So give it all you've got. I've had my share and drank my fill, and even though I'm satisfied, I'm hungry still to see what's down another road beyond the hill and do it all again. So here's to life and all the joys it brings. Here's to life, to dreamers and your dreams. It's funny how the years go by with lovers' warm hellos and sad goodbyes, leaving you with memories you've memorized to keep your winters warm. For there's no yes in yesterday, and who knows what tomorrow brings and takes away. As long as I'm still in the game, I want to play for love, for laughs, for life. So here's to life and all the joys it brings. Here's to life, to dreamers and your dreams. May all your storms be weathered and all that's good get
Here's to life, here's to love, and here's to you. May all your storms be weathered, and all that's good get better. Here's to life, here's to love, and here's to you.
For more information or to order your own copy of An Evening with Eartha Kitt, please visit thehistorymakers.org or call 866-914-1900. That's 866-914-1900. The preceding program was funded in part by Toyota, AT&T, Baldwin Richardson Foods, Lincoln Financial Group, Apple, American Airlines. A complete list is available at thehistorymakers.org. The following program was funded in part by Toyota, AT&T, Baldwin Richardson Foods, Lincoln Financial Group, Apple, American Airlines. A complete list is available at thehistorymakers.org.
Born in New York, he rose from senior White House aide to New York corporate lawyer. His legal prowess led him to head one of the nation's largest thrift institutions. His business acumen, wit, and wisdom propelled him to become CEO of the world's largest media and entertainment company. His career speaks for itself. The HistoryMakers, the nation's largest African-American video oral history archive, is proud to present An Evening with Richard Parsons. And now to our host, journalist and TV anchor, Miss Soledad O'Brien.
I am happy and honored to be here to celebrate the life and career of one of the most significant corporate leaders of our time. His name is Richard Parsons. Let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Richard Parsons to the stage. It is an honor to have an opportunity to sit down and do this interview with you because you've had a tremendous career. We all know you, of course, as the giant behind Time Warner, and you're my boss, too. So on all those fronts, thanks a bunch for me to talk to you tonight. But I would like to start this conversation from the very beginning. So let's go back to 1948. Tell me about your mom and dad.
My mom and dad. My dad was from Virginia. He was the oldest of 8 children and had grown up in Newport News, Virginia. Went to Hampton University. which was Hampton College in those days, and then came north looking for work. My mother was born in Tarrytown, New York. She was the last of 6 children. She really grew up in Brooklyn, and so they met in New York, married, and they had 5 children. I'm the second of the 5.
You grew up in Bed-Stuy. What do you remember about Bed-Stuy?
Actually, a lot, because I was, small boys and baseball, right? There's just something, I don't know, there's something in the chemistry. I was a huge Dodger fan. We lived on Pacific in Bedford, and Ebbets Field was like 6 or 8 blocks up Bedford Avenue, and my father used to take me to games, and I had an Aunt Lou who was infirm, and so she couldn't get out of the house much. She was in a wheelchair, and she listened to every Dodger game religiously, and I became a huge Dodger fan. And I remember going up to Ebbets Field, and I remember the block. We lived on a block where, life unfolded in just this one block. You had good guys, bad guys, characters, hustlers, ministers. We had a hospital, we had an armory, we had everything on our block. So you didn't have to go off the block to find out about the world.
Was your family well off, working class?
Well, we always considered ourselves working class. Now, the dirty little secret was that everybody was poor. But so what we really were, if statistically, or if you talk to the economists, we were part of the working poor. But we were working, right? They had money coming in, and they had to watch it carefully. And until when we moved, my older sister, who was born in Harlem, and I was born in Brooklyn. My parents lived in sort of rental units, and then in the mid-50s, my father bought a house out in Queens for the princely sum, I think, of $11,900, and we moved to the promised land, which was South Jamaica.
And what was that like?
Ooh.
Going from Bed-Stuy to South Jamaica?
Well, it was. First of all, we thought of it as the country. Like unbelievable. I mean, it wasn't a store on the corner like in Brooklyn. You could go, as I said, everything was on the block, including stores. Queens back in the early 50s, mid to early 50s, was still very rural and was still being developed. It was like a boy's paradise because you could, there were swamps and stuff like that.
You've said that your father is the one who instilled the idea of working hard. Tell me how he did that.
Because that's how you got anything from him. I'm not talking about love and affection. I'm talking about material things. I remember what still sticks with me. I wanted a telescope. I got into astronomy when I was, I'm going to say 8, 9 years old. And I needed a telescope. So I asked my father if he'd give me a telescope. And he said, I tell you what, I'll go halvesies with you. That was his answer to everything. I'm good for half, and you put up half. And I said, well, how am I going to get my half? And he said, you can work for it. So he gave me a job. He was constantly fixing up the house, doing things, and he decided he wanted to pave the little driveway from the street to where he'd built his carport with these Belgian blocks that all the streets in New York used to be made of, and then eventually somebody invented macadam. And so they tore up all the Belgian blocks and put macadam down, and there was a place about 2 blocks from my house where they were tearing up the street, and these things were, they were like giant loaves of bread that weighed 30 pounds. And he said, I'll tell you, I'll give you a nickel for every 2 you bring up to the house. I had this wagon, and I was schlepping these Belgian blocks. But you know what? It worked. I mean, I eventually got my half, and he was good for his half, and I figured it out, as I'm sure he wanted me to figure out, that if you would invest yourself in something and work towards it, you can achieve almost anything.
Tell me about school. 8 years old.
School was a sort of a mixed bag for me. I went from being an indifferent student. I was never a bad student. But there were whole periods of time when I was somewhat indifferent to the school experience, and then periods of time when school was engaging to me, and I would apply myself and do reasonably well.
You went to PS 45
Yep.
and Shamar Junior High School, and you graduated early.
Yeah.
So how explain that with a student who's indifferent?
Well,
and
I
sometimes
said there were periods when I wasn't indifferent. So I got effectively skipped twice, but those were in the good years. You know, if I had to do it all over again, and I did this with my son, I would not have skipped a couple of grades.
What else do you, are there other things you regret from that time? I mean, looking back, do you regret being an indifferent student?
Well, you almost have to. You almost have to. There comes a point in most people's lives, I think, when they realize how engaging learning can be and how empowering knowledge is and how satisfying it is to learn something. And you're like, boy, you know, I don't have any time for that now. I wish I should have done this when I was in college. So there is some regret, but it's mostly abstract. I don't lay awake at nights regretting it.
You had a couple of choices for college. What were you looking at?
I wanted to go to Princeton because when I was in the 7th grade, our school took a trip to Princeton. I just fell in love with the Ivy halls and the campus and the whole, you know, it's the classic Northeastern college. And so that was my first choice. My mother insisted I apply to CCNY, City College of New York, because we had no money, and she said, you can't go to Princeton. And this was before they would just give you money if you could get in. And then my third choice was the University of Hawaii.
Why the University of Hawaii?
Because when I was in high school, I sat next to this girl from Hawaii.
Really? Literally?
She rocked.
Was she attending the University of Hawaii?
No, she was from Hawaii. This is the truth. I actually didn't know that there was a University of Hawaii when I put it down on, you know, you used to be able to put 3 schools down on your SATs. And so I put Princeton, CCNY, and I thought, well, Hawaii. And I got waitlisted at Princeton and no money, and I was not going to go to CCNY. I wanted to leave. So I went to the University of Hawaii.
Was it, since the girl wasn't there?
Thoughtful, right? Yeah, but there were others. I mean, that was the whole theory of the case.
So so when you get to the University of Hawaii, it's everything you thought it was going to be. That's got to be a little bit of a sharp transition for a guy from New York.
It took me the better part of my first year. You go out to school, and even then, you know, college level athletics is consuming. I mean, you're playing 6-7 hours a day, so you're all consumed in basketball. But when it ends, and you have to make the adjustment to the place, it was very different than New York. So it took me about a year to sort of find my place. But I did, and I would say, my wife always gets mad at me when I say this, although she was a part of it. The last 3 years I spent in Hawaii were the best years of my life.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
I just had fun. You know, that's the one time in your life you're not living at home, right? And you don't have a job. And you're just hanging out and having fun.
You met your wife there. How did you meet?
We met in school. We met in class.
Is this going to be a hostile interview?
We met in class.
You met in class? What class?
Well, it was an English class, and in my sophomore year, and you know, it happened that I hadn't read the stuff, right? So you're looking around for help, and she was one of these, you know, that writes like this so you can't see anything. But finally, I think, you know, maybe I started crying or something. But she finally let me see her paper, and I thought, this is a relationship that we ought to develop.
When did you know you were in love?
After we broke up. Yeah, we dated pretty much our sophomore year, and then we both went back at the end of sophomore year to the mainland. I went to New York. She's from Oklahoma, and then we came back, and we sort of didn't hook it back up right in the junior year. And then she started dating some of my fraternity brothers. That wasn't good. And we sort of came back together, and then our senior year, we were together pretty much all the time.
When did you get married?
Right after we got out of school. That summer of 1968.
So you met in 1965?
Yeah.
Wasn't a time when interracial dating, and certainly even years later, interracial marriage was accepted, embraced, etc. Was that a big deal for you, that your girlfriend was white, that your wife-to-be was white?
No, it wasn't really a big deal for me for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're in Hawaii, right? Everybody dates. interracially in Hawaii, because it is a polyglot society, right? And two, it just wasn't, we thought about it when we were going to come back to the mainland, and our parents, obviously, were concerned about it. They reminded us, we were at pains to sort of say, this is not going to be so easy, and people are going to do this, that, and the other thing. But it's been my experience, my personal experience, that you can set yourself up for certain kinds of reactions and behavior, and if you sort of go into something with a sense of confidence and certitude, you can set the agenda frequently. So it never really actually turned out to be a problem. And also, she's a sweet gal. Everybody likes her.
You give her a lot of credit for your success.
Yeah, I do.
How do you mean?
As I told you, literally from high school through college, it may be even kind to say I was an indifferent student. I was more focused on things outside of the school environment. Just exploring the world and finding out what was outside of school. And it was because, in part, I could always rally at the end of the day and do just enough to get by, and that was fine for me. Getting by was fine as far as I was concerned, because I didn't have, I'll put it this way, I didn't have misgivings about sort of the ability to get the car to go faster if you needed to, but I didn't have anybody to do that for. I didn't have to do it for myself, and there was nobody else. Laura, that's my wife's name, Laura became the person in my life who it mattered to me what she thought of me.
And that made you?
Well, and you have to perform. You can't be a goof off. You don't want somebody who's important to you and who you care what they think about you to think you're a jerk, even if you are.
She's the one who said you should be a lawyer.
Well, it was her suggestion, because I was casting about for what to do. Originally, I thought, when I went to school, I thought I wanted to be a fighter pilot. But this was Vietnam, right? You would see all these pictures of people being napalmed and whatnot, and that just seemed like not the thing to do. So, I was, like the rest of my colleagues, we were all talking about, what are you going to do when you graduate? And she said, you ought to think about being a lawyer, because you love to argue. You would argue with a post. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I had a drink with a friend of mine one night, a guy named Dan Kelly, who I never actually got to think. And he said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't know. Laura seems to think I should go to law school. He said, well, there are always good jobs for good lawyers. And that was it. It just seemed to me that was enough of a threshold. Do something where you can get a job.
You didn't finish school?
I didn't finish college.
How did you go from not finishing college to getting into law school?
Well, back in the day, it turns out I was 6 credits short because, when you would take a course and things weren't going so well, which happened not infrequently, you would just take an I. Incomplete. So at the end of 4 years, by virtue of the accumulated I's, they said, you need 6 credits to graduate. And I was going to do it during summer school. And I had tested and gotten into law school, and there was something in New York, at least then called the New York Law Qualifying Certificate or something like that. You had to have so many credits and such on the test. And they said, oh, well, you can come here even if you don't. And so I bagged it.
The year we're looking at now is 1968. I want everyone to take a look.
In 1968, the United States was in turmoil. Riots broke out in major cities across America. Protests were held on college campuses. The country elected Richard Milhouse Nixon, and both Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy were killed by an assassin's bullet. There were protests against the war and a mounting peace movement. That same year, Richard Parsons and his bride Laura headed to New York, where he attended the University of Albany Law School. Here, Parsons graduated in 1971, number 1 in his class. He scored the highest statewide on the bar exam. This caught the attention of Governor Nelson Rockefeller's office, and Parsons was hired onto Rockefeller's staff. In the aftermath of the Watergate scandal,
Nelson Rockefeller was picked by President Gerald Ford to serve as vice president. Nelson encouraged a group that included Parsons to follow him to D.C., where Parsons served as general counsel and associate director of the Domestic Council focusing on drug issues. Then, in 1976, Nelson Rockefeller was dropped from the ticket, and Parsons and his family returned to New York.
What was that time like? Chaotic?
70, well,
Mhm.
from graduation from law school to 76?
Mhm.
No, it wasn't, that wasn't particularly chaotic. I worked for 4 years for Nelson in state government before we went to Washington. Washington was pretty chaotic because it was just on the heels of Watergate, and that was obviously a time of great national trauma. And so moving all the Nixon folks out and putting a new team on the field was the order of the day. And I really, to this day, think Gerald Ford never got quite enough credit for being the right guy at the right time in terms of just settling things down and restoring credibility in the office of the president.
When you moved back to New York, Laura, by now, was your wife.
Yeah.
You've gotten married, and you settled on the Rockefeller estate.
Well, yeah, we lived there for 8 months or so.
Your grandfather, and you tell a story about him, Old Man Judd.
Well, his name was William Judd. He was referred to as Old Man Judd. Yeah, when we left Washington, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do next. I knew I wanted to practice law, and the government said, well, look, why don't you come back to New York and work with me for a while, and you can have a place on the estate, and, you know, sort it out, take a year, whatever. So that's what we did. And when we got there, and Nelson had known this, some gardener, guy named, I remember his name, came up to me and said, you know, I knew your grandfather, Old Man Judd. Now, I really didn't know my grandfather. My grandfather died when I was 3, and my grandfather on my mother's side, she was a Judd. But I knew the story that, you know, I told you she was born in Tarrytown. He had been on the estate, and apparently had become, at one point in time, the head gardener, and he had trained a lot of other people in before he retired and then ultimately died. And so this guy knew my grandfather, and he said he was a great old guy, taught me everything I know about working in the garden, so on and so forth. And he disappeared, and a couple of days later he came back and said, you know, I saw my sister, who had been a cook. These were Polish immigrants who had come during the Depression, and she was a cook in the kitchens. And I saw my sister, and I said, Margaret, guess what? You'll never guess what. Old Man Judd's grandson has just moved back on the estate. And she said, that's nice. Is he working in the gardens? You know, it's, the wheel turns.
Was politics something that was incredibly interesting to you in a personal way, something you'd want to do one day down the road?
I thought it was, but ultimately concluded that it wasn't for me, at least at that point in time. Well, because even bad politicians work hard. Even bad, I mean, Nelson had, at one point in time, he wanted me to run for Attorney General. There was a guy named Louis Lefkowitz who was the Attorney General, and Louis had been Attorney General for 26 years or something like that, and he was going to retire. So he said, go up and talk to Louis, and we'll figure this out. And I went and talked to Louis, and he took out this book, for his appointment book, because nobody had Blackberries in those days, and he showed me, he said, pick a day. So I picked a day a year hence, and he went down and he had 7 events already scheduled for that day, a year hence. And I thought to myself, you know, I have a wife, I have 3 small children, I can't do that. So I'll put it off. And I'm still putting it off.
Talk about the relationship you had with Nelson Rockefeller. You talk a lot about him as a mentor, but also even beyond that personal relationship.
He was my mentor. He was my first sort of professional mentor, and he was a terrific mentor in that, you know, if a mentor is somebody who's supposed to, almost like a pulling guard, run through the line and knock everybody down so you can just kind of zip through. He did that for me, but we became kind of pals. And I liked him. He liked me, and he did a lot for me. He basically, you know, to the extent that that success in life is a combination of luck, what you know and who you know, Rockefeller opened a world to me of important relationships that a kid from Bed-Stuy in South Jamaica would never, ever have enjoyed.
relationships that you would later sort of come back to?
Yeah, almost everything I have done in my professional life since that time, I can sort of trace back to some kind of connection that came out of the Rockefeller. But again, through him, I got to work in the White House for a couple of years, and when I was in state government, and some of these names you'll hear before, again, the guy who was superintendent of banks was a guy named Harry Albright. And, you know, the way governor's offices or president's offices work, they have a group of internal staff people who intermediate between center and the departments. So I had the banking department. I got to know Harry reasonably well. I got to know a fellow named Judge Tyler, who was on the Waterfront Commission because Rockefeller put in there. I got to know the governor's family very well. And it was quite a family. I mean, Wynn was gone, but John was the oldest brother, Nelson, Lawrence, and David. And each of them in their own way has been helpful to me over the course of time.
He wanted you to stay on and work for him.
Yeah.
And you wanted to go a different direction.
Yeah, I wanted the law firm experience. And ultimately, he had this goal or objective or desire for me. He thought I should be on the Supreme Court one day. And so I said to him, I can't get to the Supreme Court from here. You know, I got to go and practice law and be part of the bar and the establishment. He said, got it. And then it was okay.
Got a little clip about the new experience you were heading to. Let's take a look.
In 1977, Parsons was asked to join the law firm of Patterson, Belknap, Webb, and Tyler by former Deputy Attorney General Harold Tyler. Nelson Rockefeller objected initially, but then he became one of Parsons' clients. In 2 short years, Parsons was named a partner with clients that included Estee Lauder and Happy Rockefeller. Parsons would practice for 10 years, building a stellar reputation, and he was promoted to managing partner. At this same time, one of his clients, Dime Bancorp's chairman and CEO, Harry Albright, asked Parsons to come aboard as its chief operating officer. Reagan was president, and the United States underwent the worst S&L crisis in U.S. history. Parsons had never managed a bank, but in short order, he was successful in helping to reduce the bank's $1 billion debt to $335 million. 2 years later, at the age of 42, Parsons was rewarded by being promoted to chairman and CEO of Dime Savings Bank. This promotion caught the attention of many in corporate America.
Did you feel you were completely ready to take over?
No. But it didn't bother me. You see, you know, I was already battle tested when it's a true story. Obviously, this was in the works, negotiating for a while, but when I finally decided to do it, and I knew it was now going to become public, my wife insisted that I sort of tell the children, who were then, I don't know, 12, 10, and 9, something like that. And so I told them at dinner one night, I said, well, you know, just so you guys know, because you're going to hear something about this, I'm leaving my law firm, and I'm going to go become president of the Dime Bank. My son, who is sort of a fairly robust guy, eats with both hands, just kept eating. Good luck, he said. Both of my daughters dropped their silverware, literally, and the oldest one whipped around and looked at her mother and said, has he talked to you about this? And then she looked back at me and she said, what do you know about running a bank? And then the youngest one said, yeah, you can't just start out as president. You have to start out as like teller. So I was ready for it.
It's when others piled on. It didn't
right.
Were you nervous about going in? I mean, what did you know about running a bank?
This is a hostile environment. Something. I mean,
were you worried? I mean, were you?
No, I knew a lot about the business because I had been representing the bank for half a dozen years. And while I wasn't a banker per se, I knew how the thing worked. And then the other issue is managing people, right? And that's, I think, and Harry was going to still be there. And his deal with me is he says, I'll teach you in the next 2 years. He wanted to retire in 2 years. He said, I'll teach you everything you need to know about running a bank. I just want somebody in here who I think is principled and who has some leadership capacities and who can take the bank forward into the future.
Talk about your wife and your 3 children. I mean, running a bank then becomes even as many hours a lawyer has to work. Kind of could be a next level of being busy. And you turn down politics, so a year late, a year out in your calendar, you wouldn't be doing 7 events. Were you concerned about that? I mean, was that something that ever came to you in your career where you thought,
I wasn't concerned about going to the bank because, the theory at the time about savings bankers were, they had what they called the 3-6-3 rule.
What's that?
You took the money in at 3%, you lent it out at 6%, and you were on the golf course by 3 o'clock. So, in fact, several of my partners who didn't think this was the right move for me kept saying, you're gonna go, you're gonna make some money, but it's for old guys, you're not an old guy, you're just gonna sit back and clip coupons, and it's a sinecure almost. It turned out not to be that way because of the thrift crisis, but nobody, in my view, at least in New York, works as hard as trial lawyers do. I mean, it's a crazy business. That's one of the reasons I left.
Before we talk about the thrift crisis, did you have any thoughts about leaving a successful firm where you'd moved up quickly and you were clearly a rainmaker?
It was hard. It was hard because it's not just my partners. I was managing partner of the firm. I'd been running the firm for 4 years, and so you feel like you're going to leave people in the lurch a little bit. And I liked my partners, but it's also clients. Lawyers develop a relationship with clients where they come to rely on you. They come to look to you for certain kinds of things, and if you like that sort of relationship, that's something that's hard to capture in business.
So what ultimately made you make that decision?
Probably my wife.
And she thought it was right because?
Well, we had this conversation, and she said, Laura is the kind of person where she will tell you what you ought to be thinking. So you said, well, I don't know, what do you think? Well, if I were you, I would do this, I would do that. I said, well, you're not me. I didn't ask you what you would do if you were me. What do you think? And then she sat back and she thought and said, well, I'll say this. You seem to have gotten a bit stale. You don't relate to what you're doing now the way you used to. And so you've gotten kind of stale in it. And so that says to me you're probably ready to do something else. And I don't know if this is the right thing or not, but give it a shot.
Did you feel ready for a new challenge?
I felt I thought she was right, I thought she was right. I thought that, there are 2 kinds of people in the world. There are some who just get better at and take more satisfaction out of something the longer they do it and the better they become at it and the deeper they go into it. And then there are those who after a fashion, you feel like you've been around this track once. And while it's not identical every other time around the track, it's vaguely familiar and less exciting and less rewarding. And I'm the latter type.
How challenging was it to become the director of have an operations position essentially at a time when you have this massive thrift crisis?
Well, it turned out to be, it was more challenging than I thought. I mean, every time I made a move, it never works out the way you think it's going to work out. It never does. It always works out. There's always some twist or turn that is different. And in the case of the bank, it wasn't so much learning the business as it was learning how to manage other people. I'd point out 2 things. One, being sort of the friendly bear type, right? I went in and made a lot of friends at the bank and so on and so forth. And then you're in the middle of a crisis and you have to start making personnel judgments that are harsh. It's very hard to sit in judgment on a friend, right? In fact, with respect to your friends, you're supposed to forgive them their trespasses, right? Because they're your friend. As a boss, you can't do that. My job was really to sort of keep the troops jollied up and moving forward and keep the regulators from closing in on the bank while we worked out our problems, which meant that they had to have confidence that we were both on the right track and that we wouldn't embarrass them at the end of the day.
How do you keep troops jollied up when you have got to fire people,
It's not easy.
a lot of people?
Not easy. It's not easy. Although, I think there's no substitute for communication. We went from 4,400 people to less than 2,000, right? And I didn't catch a suit. I fired them all. Well, half of that was attrition. And firing is a tough word. We don't like that word. We downsized, right-sized, restructured. But if you go and talk to people,
They got fired.
well,
They feel they got fired.
You see, well,
But
yeah,
how do
yeah.
you, I mean, it's very hard.
It is,
It's,
but
it's
you-
hard to keep morale of a company, which is what's really critical at a time when you also have to do the tough
Yeah.
call of letting certain people go.
It is. It's hard. But I think if people understand the circumstances, it certainly goes a long way towards, with respect to those who have to go. And, you know, we tried to be helpful to everybody who had to go. And with respect to those who stay, they understand why and why it's necessary and what the future could look like if this plan works.
Explain to us what you achieved in the turnaround. What did you go from at most dire to
Well,
how did it end up?
It sounds melodramatic, perhaps, but we saved the bank because the bank was marked for extinction.
Right.
They have various rankings under the federal regulatory system, 1 through 5, and 1s are the strongest, and 5 are the ones that have to be taken out. We had at one point got ranked a 5, and so everybody knew we were gone. And we got the thing turned around, and you know, banks are important entities in this economy. Banks are next to the heartbeat of the nation. You can't have a modern economy without an effective banking system. So saving the bank meant not only saving the jobs of the people who work there, but an institution that helps fund people's dreams, helps them buy houses, helps them send their kids to college, helps them fund their lives. So it was a worthwhile thing to have done.
You started working in politics again, 1991, and then 93. You worked with Rudy Giuliani on his campaign, lost in 91, but he won in 93. And he was running against black mayor, David Dinkins. Some people give you flack for not supporting the black mayor in that.
Yeah, well, Rudy and I, he lost in 89. Rudy and I had been law partners for years, and in fact, I'd worked with him in Washington. And we had been very close when we practiced law. In fact, we tried a lot of lawsuits together. And I thought, you know, the city was not in good shape, and my favorite mayor has always been David Dinkins. I love David as a personal friend. But I thought that what Rudy could bring to the city was what the city needed. The city needed to be civilized. It was just out of control. And you can't accomplish any of these other objectives if people don't want to go out on the street, or if they, you know, if anybody who has the opportunity to leave leaves. And so I thought he was the better choice for New Yorkers at the time.
Was that a difficult call to make to your personal friend, David Dinkins?
It was, but it wasn't as difficult as a lot of other things I've had to do.
At that point, did you feel maybe politics again? Why start working? I mean, was it we were working on his behalf because he was a friend and you thought he'd be good, or was it also maybe it's an opportunity to dip back into politics?
No, it was clearly the former. I thought he would be the right guy, and I was happy to help out, but I didn't want to go back into public life at that point in time.
At that point in time, you joined Time Warner's board. Is that right? 91?
Yeah, 91.
What was that like?
Well, that was a hoot.
Why was it a hoot?
Steve Ross was, I mean, today, if you sort of type in mogul, the picture of Steve Ross comes up. Steve Ross was the last of the big Hollywood moguls. And he was an interesting guy, and this was an interesting company. Time and Warner had just come together, and the you know, sort of blending the cultures and putting the businesses together. And for me, at least being on the board of a company that operated on a global stage was new and interesting.
It was an acceptance to the board that would, in many ways, change your life because it would lead to your next position. Let's first, before I ask you a question out of it, let's roll a tape.
Okay.
In 1991, on the recommendation of Lawrence Rockefeller, Dick Parsons was invited by Stephen Ross, Time Warner's CEO, to join Time Warner's board. A year later, Stephen Ross was dead, and Gerald Levin, former head of HBO, was promoted to chairman and CEO. Levin invested heavily in cable television and led the way for Time Warner's acquisition of Turner Broadcasting and its charismatic founder, Ted Turner. Levin also recruited Parsons to serve as president of Time Warner. Many doubted Parsons' qualifications fit for this position since he had no background in media. By the year 2000, Levin engineered one of the largest mergers in the media industry when AOL merged with Time Warner. This presented a clash of cultures and personalities, with Ted Turner, Gerald Levin, Steve Case, and Bob Pittman working at odds with each other. By 2001, Parsons was named co-COO along with Bob Pittman, and by 2002, Pittman was out and Parsons was named Time Warner's CEO. This surprised many, but it was Parsons that led Time Warner back to a more stable base.
Brought in again at a time of crisis.
I was going to say, who did these things?
It's all true. It's all true.
What's up with that?
Once again, you're brought in to stabilize. How did training as a lawyer, I mean, clearly translated into not only being successful in business, but being the guy who could come in and make everything stable?
Yeah, I think training as a lawyer only goes so far, but lawyers are trained, particularly litigators, are trained to get on top of subject matter quickly, because you have to know. I mean, I used to try all kinds of suits, from medical malpractice suits to business suits, and you know, I could pass. There was a point in time I could pass as an oncologist because I knew so much about oncology, because I'd have to cross-examine these guys. So you learn the art of getting on top of subject matter quickly. And you're also oriented toward problem solving.
What was that time like at Time Warner, where it seemed so chaotic? And if you read the newspapers, it was often bad news.
Almost the entire 14 years I was at Time Warner were a roller coaster ride, because after Steve Ross died, there was a lot of tumult around Jerry becoming CEO and moving a lot of people out and moving me in. Then we merged with Ted Turner's company. Ted, who I regard as one of the most brilliant and accomplished businessmen of the last half of the 20th century. Nevertheless, if you didn't have a crisis when Ted came to visit you, Ted would create one. You know?
None of them were small personalities. What was it like to work with a Ted Turner-sized personality?
He's just too much. You know? He's funny, and he's intense, but he's very, like many entrepreneurs, he is convinced in his bones that his feel is the right feel. And so if you're more analytical, you know, sometimes you guys have difficulty coming to the same conclusions. And then we did the merger with AOL, and that was very tough, because there were just two cultures that would not even, well, they just would not blend. There was no way to bring these two cultures together.
When that merger happened, what were you thinking about it? Did you think this could work? Did you think this might not work?
I thought it could work. And as I've said before on occasion, I actually voted for the merger. I was more circumspect about it. I thought, you know, I remember saying to our board, this is going to change everything. Everything's going to be different from this point going forward. But I thought it could work. Several things happened. One, their business model. This is the big thing that happened. The business model that underlaid the AOL business got obsoleted by technological progress. The thing that AOL did and charged for became free. Email, right? So you didn't have to pay to $18.95 or whatever it was a month to have an email account. You can now go other places and get it free. And so AOL has been on a march since that time to try and develop a new business model and new revenue models. But the other thing was the cultures just, they were truly hostile to each other.
How so? Describe each side.
And it's a shame that we couldn't make the cultures work, but I certainly couldn't. The new order felt that the old had to get out of the way completely. That you know, these were, quote, dead tree businesses. And so the sooner we could just sort of take all of the rest of the Time Warner, sort of sweep it off the table, and replace it with the new order, or use whatever was there and push it through the vehicle and instrumentalities of AOL, the better. And the old order, which what we had thought was that you can't just keep doing the same thing, and so we bring in some new thinking and new direction. And the old order was just resistant to change, but they just came at the world from totally different places and different sides, and there was no accommodating or bringing the two together. The thing that, and this is true not just of AOL, but a lot of the new media businesses, I mean, they have thought about, well, what is cool? What's cool? What's really, you know, we got this new technology and new people coming along, and what would be a cool thing? If we create something cool, people will come to it. And the old order sort of thinks about things in the opposite way. What can we sell, and then how do we build it? And we thought if we could put these two together, you'd have the best of both. You know, what's cool and you can sell. And it turned out they just fought with each other.
I mean, at one point we saw a shot where everyone's in the chairs and you all look like you're smiling, but what was it really like behind the scenes? Was it just...
It wasn't as bad as it's been written up in several books and magazines, but when you have a bunch of people, each of whom is convinced that they and they alone are right, it makes it hard for collegial and cooperative consensus. And, you know, Ted and Steve, who were two very, very successful and very strong entrepreneurs, each had a view of, and both of them was interesting to me, to step back now. Not many people make this comparison, but when Ted did his merger with Time Warner, his vision was that all of the other parts of Time Warner would line up and support Turner and be translated through the world, to the world, through the Turner vehicles. So that Warner Brothers would take all their movies and push them through Turner channels, and only Turner channels. And Time Warner Cable would make its cable plant available to Turner channels so they could spread all. And of course the other guys didn't think that way. When AOL, we did the merger with AOL, I remember Steve coming into a meeting of the music group once. We had a big music company at the time, and he said, well, you know, essentially, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take all the music that you guys sort of create, and the artists and whatnot, and we'll just give it away free on AOL. And they didn't see it that way either. And his theory was, I mean, it wasn't as though he was crazy. His theory was that it would make the AOL service stickier and more attractive. So you'd keep your customers and you'd bring in more customers because you had all this free music on AOL. But to the guys who had spent their entire business lives, you know, sort of eking out a living, finding and developing artists and then creating and promoting and then selling the music to people who wanted it, that didn't seem like a sensible play and sensible way to go. And the two sides never came together. Ultimately, shortly after I became CEO, it became clear that one culture was going to have to prevail in order to get the company settled down. And so that was the culture that I came from, right? The older Time Warner culture. But I still thought that we could rehabilitate our way into and capture the magic of this new media business. But I think it's just, they're so different that it's a very hard cultural meld.
What do you think Time Warner would look like if it in fact hadn't done the merger? I mean, were there things that were gained and things that were lost, or just things that were lost?
I think certainly a lot was lost, a lot of money was lost. And some people were lost, and good people. I mean, Bob Pittman was and still is a friend of mine, but you know, it's like think of it an organ transplant. It was just tissue rejection from all the AOL guys. What was gained, however, was more of an appreciation for the fact that the old media has to begin to morph into new media, so that we have now in every one of our divisions sort of, I'll call it divisionally indigenous efforts to extend the brands and the content into the new media space. So, you know, and Time Inc., people.com, which is the online version of People. Each of the divisions has understood better that we need to move in that direction, in the direction of taking old media content and re-platforming it, repositioning it in the new media space. But those have more or less had to be developed within the divisions so that it's compatible with the existing business models as opposed to completely dismissive or disruptive of it.
Besides getting through the crisis and the chaos, what were your goals for when you started running Time Warner? I mean, what did you want to accomplish for the company?
Well, the first thing was, so to get things settled down. The company actually was never in as bad a shape as it was perceived to be. The fact that the AOL business model had sort of collapsed or been obsoleted and we lost so much value caused everybody to think, this company is a disaster. All the other divisions were still running pretty well, and all of the traditional Time Warner divisions were sort of best in class. We had the best movie studio, we had the best magazine company, we had the best cable networks, we had the second largest, and I would say technologically the best cable distribution platforms, and Warner Music Group was probably not best in class, which is one of the reasons I sold it. So we had very strong businesses, but in traditional media areas, and so highlight that, fix AOL, and then transform these other businesses into both old media and online were the challenges.
At Time Warner, you were always a very good mentor and sought out. I mean, even in the cafeteria, I noticed African-American young men and women who would say, Dick Parsons is in the cafeteria, I'm gonna go grab 5 minutes with him if I can. And you always made time for people, always.
Yeah, I don't come from the same point in the compass as a lot of, for example, these young athletes who say, well, I'm not a role model, and I'm a basketball player, I'm a whatever, and you shouldn't put that on me. I just think I think that's wrong. I think that you are, in fact, just by virtue of the fact that you exist and you're in a certain position, you are a role model for other members of your community, right? And so I just think that comes with the territory.
And back to your wife, Laura. All steps the way, she was continuing to provide guidance for you, would you say?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. People always say to me, well, who do you go to for business advice? Because most of the people who know your business are competitors. My wife has always been my best advisor. She does not like this term. I think it's actually not so bad. She's what I call the smart dummy. And by that I mean, she doesn't know anything about my business, but she's a smart woman, right? And she asks questions that somebody who really doesn't know asks. And then when they get you, you haven't thought the thing through, right? She'll say, well, I don't know, why are you doing this? And sometimes you have a good answer, and sometimes you say, well, that's what we've always done. And they say, but I don't know, it doesn't seem to make sense to me. And you think about it, and if you can't come up with a better answer, then that's what we've always done. You have to go back and think about it again. She's a smart woman. So she's basically, what is she gonna do, right? Except be supportive.
Tell me about the new love of your life, Jack.
That's one of the reasons I want to stay in New York. Jack's my grandson.
That's one of the reasons you stay in New York?
Oh, yeah, Jack's all right.
How much time do you spend with him?
It's just amazing. I mean, I don't know how many grandparents there are out there, but like my wife said, you didn't even like your own kids. But,
do you see him every day?
I don't see him every day, but we see him several times a week. He stays over sometime. If you came to my house, you would think we had a baby. There's everything there.
And the way you talk about Jack, sometimes it sounds like you delivered that baby. The way you love that Jack.
I was there within 15 minutes.
How old is he now?
He's 18 months old.
He's a cute kid.
Yeah, Jack's all right. I introduced him to everybody.
Does it surprise you that as a high-powered CEO, you now think in terms of being around your grandson?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, I'm almost ready to do the nanny thing. We go to the park. It is actually at some level it surprises everybody else, and I can't explain it. I really can't explain it. I have a theory, but
can we hear the theory?
guys are, I was on safari once for my 50th birthday, and we were in the Serengeti, and we would get in these jeeps and you roll around, and every day we found this pride of lions, and the female lions are always doing something. They're running around, they're feeding the kids, they're cleaning them up, they're hunting. The guys will always sleep. I mean, like always. And I was trying to get a picture of one of these guys. So I said to the guy, what do we do to wake these guys up? He said, no, you don't understand. He said, they only wake up when the bad guys come and they have to protect the pride. And it was like an epiphany. I mean, we all have our roles. And so when I had a young wife and then a young family, that was like at the center of my world, right? That was my pride, and I had to protect it. Now, they don't need me, right? My wife is a very accomplished, it's not that they don't like me, but they're very accomplished professional in her field, and the kids are all, gone and grown and married or whatever and doing their thing. And I didn't have a pride to relate to. Now I do. Oh, Jack.
If you're given 3 lines for people to say, this is who he was, what's in those 3 lines?
Good husband, good father, good grandfather. I'll give a 4th line. My grandmother used to say that the essence of a good man was humility and grace. I'd go with that.
Humility and grace in person. Dick Parsons, thanks for talking with us. Real quick.
For more information or to order your own copy of An Evening with Richard Parsons, please visit thehistorymakers.org or call 866-914-1900. That's 866-914-1900. The preceding program was funded in part by Toyota, AT&T, Baldwin Richardson Foods, Lincoln Financial Group, Apple, American Airlines. A complete list is available at thehistorymakers.org.